the 27th of July 2020, 16 past 3 p.m. I have received a video from of the song Recuerdo, something like that. And I have also received a video from the news, the Assange news, or I don't know what it was. And I'm not really I don't really know what I am supposed to do with it. But the communication should be answered. I'm not quite in the mood to talk about the things that have been going on in the recent days. It has gone even further than it had been before. So perhaps I could just talk freely over my coffee and with my cigarette. On the whole, I believe that when one of Polish girls, when a Polish girl, oh, excuse me, a woman, after all I'm 45, but in a way I'm a girl, meets a Latino man from America, actually from Puerto Rico. There's a huge gap between us, which is quite paradoxical in the context of Poland and the United States having become such great friends recently. Which poses many questions. I digress a lot. So if I were to digress right now, I could elaborate on the question of the right wing. What is really the right wing? What is it in Poland and what is it in the United States? These are two completely different worlds. We don't have color issues in Poland. If we have them, they are not ours. We did not have colored people in Poland. Well, perhaps apart from Romans. Some people had dark faces, some people had light faces, fairer. Or perhaps we do have the issue. After all, we had people, soldiers from the Middle East staying here, from Afghanistan, I guess, or perhaps not. I'm not very good at history. I have just begun. But the Soviet Union was there. So maybe when I was a little child, there were colored people. I know they were. There were. And, actually, black people were considered to be devils. I mean, that was the association. If you see the black man, it's a devil. But we had those elementary books at school telling us about the black Mambo boy. Bambo boy. His name was Bambo. And he lived in Africa. He has black skin. A friend or mate. He learns diligently throughout the morning from his first black man reading text. So that was more or less the image of the black man we got in the primary school. We could not see them in the street. I don't remember if we saw them on TV. Well, we certainly saw Michael Jackson when he appeared. I'm not sure if he appeared on RTV at the time he appeared in the entertainment world. We saw Amerindians because they were Westerns. So we watched the white man and the red man as children growing up in the Soviet Poland. Our issue basically was the terrible Germans attacking Poland, our courageous soldiers, and the help that came from the Soviet Union, who decided to stay afterwards and help us to rule our country. Especially when someone was attending the school named after Marshal Ivan Koniev in Krakow. Marshal Ivan Koniev saved Krakow from destruction. In the 5th grade, all the pupils were included in the obligatory membership of the Association of Friendship between Poland and the Soviet Union. I didn't like it, so I stood up and said I didn't want to be the member. And I was standing so in the middle of the class with others sitting during my Russian lesson, during my lesson in Russian. I was 12 years old. Then there were changes. The changes started maybe a bit earlier. Maybe some teachers were alluding to some untruths existing in education, or maybe they were not. But one thing is certain, they were doing a great job of actually teaching us. So we were prepared for all studies because we had a lot of grammar. Not learning the endings, learning to think of a sentence and analyze it. Put parts of the sentence in order. What belongs where? What the relations between the parts of the sentence are. We studied poetry, and there was a lot of emphasis on what's human and humanitarian. Perhaps not humanitarian, humanitarian was not the word then. but sensitivity was very important. The horrors of the war, but also seeing the man next to us. And we actually read the poem about cannibals. Do not look with that eye of the wolf at others. Understand people. Do not tread upon the weak, or do not tread down the weak. And so on and so forth. This is not a poetic translation. This is to give you an idea what our school was like. We had also some exercises in empathy. For instance, when we read Robinson Crusoe, we were asked to imagine we are on the desert island with the only living creature, and we were to describe our life there from the perspective of the Robinson Crusoe. So that was really teaching us to imagine we are there in the place alone. And what we do and what we think and what we feel, a diary. We were prepared for reflection. Before the All Saints' Day, we would go to the cemetery to help in making the place orderly. And afterwards we would write compositions where we would consider life and death and the sense of it. Even in the communist Soviet system, our life was not empty or superficial. Perhaps our compositions could be used against us, but we are certainly prepared for a meaningful life. As a student at the university, I was asked, not only me, but me among the many, to write a composition concerning the United States, America, in Poland. I don't remember really what the task was, but I remember that I was writing about McDonald's as a sign of the American presence and the cultural change in Poland. And when you think of it, my idea of Paris is a street couple. That's probably because of Ernest Hemingway, who happens to be American. But the United States was McDonald's. I believe most philologists, when they think of the South America or the Latin America, think of Isabel Allende, or perhaps not. So there is a promise of something that Poles could find themselves in affinity with, due to our romanticism and the presence of spirits. The presence of spirits that are in the center of this key conflict with the Russian Tsar, the oppression. But then there was not only Russia, there was Prussia and there was Austria, depending on where you live. For some reason, Russia has remained historically that overwhelming oppressive power. And perhaps there's a reason. But also historically, when you think of it, at the time of the Jagiellonian rule, with the great victory over the German Order of the Holy Cross in 1410, the Polish queen, Jadwiga, called king for some reason, had the right to rule over Russia. So that has been changing throughout the ages too. Recently, someone asked and someone answered, or actually it was a false recording of a conversation that did not take place. But anyway, the question was posed concerning Ukraine, well, specifically Lvov. Lvov? Lviv, excuse me. If Poles were planning to fight for it, from what I know, we used to fight for it, and rightfully so. But then, it was founded by Russia. And then, most of its history is actually Polish. And then, Ukrainian. For a while it was also Austrian, if I recall correctly. Well, that's somewhere in my lessons of the Polish school. Sometimes, when I would get angry at Poland, I would say that we in Krakow would not be that unhappy to be a part of Austria, would we? So, in Poland, the question of the identity, of having the Poland after we had not had it, due to the three powers, Russia, Prussia and Austria, has a spiritual value and it's a very strong part of our identity, which is important if you think of creating those huge global movements. of the cosmopolitan value. Funnily enough, nowadays, I mentioned it elsewhere, but to make this recording complete or at least sufficient, nowadays we have the juxtaposition of the cosmopolitan and the national or nationalistic. So there's this question asked for the first time by John Lennon about countries, religions, with the promise of peace when these were to disappear, if these were to disappear. From the Polish perspective, should you try to achieve the purpose of peace, defined as no countries and no religion too, it would definitely be a very good reason for a major mobilization of forces, whatever forces you may get, and fighting to the last drop of blood, or to the last tissue of what used to be our body. That is as long as we are Polish. From my current perspective, all those tales of honor sound false. This is not a beautiful nation. That's the evidence of life, of what the people are today, of what they are doing, and doing it with full awareness of what they are doing. But then there's still the spirit living. In my speech or address that I created in response to the debate, or not the debate, but the reporting and responses to the reporting following Lech Wałęsa's address to the US Congress, which placed Poland among the what was the word? What kind of democracy was it? Together with Turkey? Did I recall it correctly? What kind of democracy was it? Backwarding democracy? Well, something of the kind. With Lech Wałęsa's speech, address, translated with a slump, with many changes of meaning, and certainly a major change of a tone, defining attitudes and relations between the speaker and the addressees. In that speech, I made a point, but right now when I'm talking about the point I wanted to mention somehow has escaped. So what was it that I wanted to say about the speech, about what I said in the speech? I know the definition of the nation. So what is really the American nation? And when you think of it, yesterday, I think, Donald Trump posted those uplifting words by a person who has died recently, if I understand correctly. A very powerful address, which definitely opened the gate to possible negotiations on my part, or at least a dialogue. But then I know the reality, so you cannot raise the Holy Cross and physically damage virginity by making it prostitution, which is what the current administration is personally responsible for. Nonetheless, we have the question of the nation, and this is the question about statehood. So perhaps it is correct to say that the nation starts with the arrival of the English. But we cannot forget that there were other Indians there. And I'm not sure what's the legal status of someone buying something from another person if the person from whom the something that is purchased is not aware of the conditions of the transaction. So the person is abused due to the person's ignorance and inability to participate in the transaction, which could be compared. It is not a good comparison, but in terms of the possible power of the person in relation to the strong power arriving and wanting to use the person, it could be compared to a retarded person, well, perhaps economically retarded or financially retarded. I could call myself financially retarded, so don't get offended. So, if there is such a transaction that took place ages ago, can it be questions on legal grounds? The question of Indians making the transaction with the power that arrived to take it from them, and the consequence for the other Indians. And this is the huge American problem, which is one issue concerning the nation. Still, I have seen that there's a very positive movement towards taking care of the people now. I don't know if the government can be trusted, because after what has happened to me, obviously, I don't have the trust. But in the current world, certainly we need the power to help. There's always the question of ties. The left wing offers care, offers all sorts of, offers counsel, etc. What are the ties attached? I believe the ties currently are on both sides. I'm raising these points up because I hate this generally consented to habit and routine of treating all people like idiots, or if not treating them like ones, then trying hard to make them ones. I believe that we should be fair in our relations. So already by the time when we have the English immigrants in what is now the United States, we have two different cultures creating the nation. Unless we wanted to say that Amerindians are not the nation. And then we have new arrivals. If we think of Great Britain, we can think of what was happening in Great Britain, and then the arrival of Rome. The change that has taken place here in Europe with the European Union, which has surfaced only recently, I believe I made this push forward by actually quoting the anthem and starting talking about it. Probably if it has reached my awareness, it must have been already somewhere there discussed, or someone must have noticed it, because there was no reason why I should suddenly reach for the anthem. So if I reached for the anthem, it means that someone had been considering or weighing those points. But I do support this argument put forward as a huge question of what do we really want in Europe, because the European Union is taking us from the Roman culture to the Greek one as the roots, as the philosophy. And what does it imply? Well, it implies a lot. And this is like a postulate, like a program that will be being realized, because this is not, history is not about something that is dead. It is about the spiritual power that has been creating the life of humankind. And I'm still talking to Ricky Martin, even if you don't believe it. When you think of Greece, this is really, well, my first thought was that this is really shebangs, but without the pornography. But then, just as this thought was to float through my mind and be expressed, the counter thought came. Oh, really? Really without the pornography? I believe the American reality is completely different. From what I know, the slaves, as far as Poland is concerned, and other races, so these were Polish women kidnapped and treated as slaves by Muslims. This is what Saint Adalbert, Saint Wojciech Adalbert, correct? Oh, let me check. Well, at least in German, Adalbert. In English, Adalbert of Prague. Is he the one? So, but it doesn't make sense. Or perhaps it does. Anyway, he was negotiating for the women to be freed or not to be kidnapped anymore. we don't have Negro issues or Niger issues. And this reality is obviously completely different in the United States. And in the Latin America. Shockingly enough, when I started my course on Tudors, I learned that it was actually Africans. 1550, African slaves shipped to Brazil, excuse me, that these were actually the people from South America. African slaves shipped to Brazil to work sugar plantations. But then 1551 North African pirates enslaved the entire population of Gozo, Malta. So I'm not sure, was it about who was stronger and who won the mastership and who was left with the slavery? Basically, what I want to say is that when you call for equality and phrase it in the left-wing terms, to me it means those uneducated, rude, vulgar Russians getting a hold on the aristocrat or royal, so far superior to them, and using the physical strength to destroy what's far above them and what's the quality of life they would never create, because all they want is the proper food, the proper sex, the proper sense of importance, and whatever is proper for the low world. Agnieszka.